On this episode of the Live Faith First podcast, we have somebody who has successfully bridged the gap between Duke and UNC Chapel Hill. And if you know anything about college rivalries, you know that's a big deal. So we have an expert with us today. His name is Piers Godwin. He started an organization called the Listen First Project. He was in Uganda and saw how in communities where there had been genocide just a few years earlier, they had found a way to bridge that divide and come together. And it broke his heart to know that he was coming back to the U.S., to a country that was being torn apart by polarization. And so Piers has a ton of experience with helping people navigate divides. He's been featured in Fox News and MSNBC, New York Times, and the USA Today, and a ton of other places. And so he's going to help us today navigate through how do we have healthy conversations around polarizing subjects in our homes, in our communities, and how do we navigate this season well. So let's get ready for this episode of the Live Faith First podcast. The U.S. is polarized. Now, we say that as if it's truth. You read it in articles, and there's no footnotes anymore. We don't see stats around that statement anymore. It's just like, we're polarized, and we just continue on. But are we as polarized as we think we are? Is it actually as bad as we've made it out to be? Or is it, if it is that bad, what can we do about it? Is there something we can do to help us get across these divides? So here at the Live Faith First podcast, we wanted to bring an expert on today to help us navigate through all of this. So we have Piers Godwin with us today. Piers, are you ready to give this a go?
Let's do it, Elliot. So glad to be here.
Yeah, this is awesome. I thank you so much. You've done so much in this space, and so I'm excited for this conversation. And before we get into that, though, would you give us a cliff notes of your life? Where were you born? Where were you raised? How did you get to where you are today?
Absolutely. Happy to. Was born and raised in North Carolina. I'm still here in Durham, North Carolina today, and grew up in the church. My first story of bridging divides is that I grew up a rabid North Carolina Tar Heel fan, which any college sports fans who are watching will appreciate, that I did the unthinkable in joining the dark side. I went to Duke undergrad, and I joke with people that, these days we've had Duke University, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill tweeting about Listen First and this whole bridging divides movement. So I just don't understand, if we can bridge that divide, why politics, faith, religion, race should be any problem.
But you tackled the biggest one. When I saw that in your resume, I'm like, how could this guy do that? Like, I'm from California, and even I know you don't do that. So
no, you don't do that. But in North Carolina, majored in public policy there at Duke, and then went up to Washington, D.C. for a few years, worked in politics, loved the political game and spirit. Still have a lot of appreciation for the folks involved in politics, but my life really took a turn and led me to being here with you today, Elliot, in early 2013, when my former wife and I spent the first 6 months of 2013 in Uganda, Africa, with the Christian International Relief Organization. And it was that perspective from outside this great country that led me into this work. In Uganda, I was seeing some abject material poverty, but this incredible relational and spiritual wealth among folks despite those material circumstances. It was inspiring and an honor to get to know the folks in Uganda in the time I was there, but really crystallized for me when I realized what I'd be coming home to. Mm-hmm. Now, we're not talking about 2024, we're talking about 2013. It might feel kind of quaint relative to where we are now, but as I was on an overnight bus ride to go and see the cool animals on a safari before coming home, I saw headlines that, never mind DC, where I'd been for the past few years, but right here in my bless your heart backyard of North Carolina, folks were at each other's throats, and the vitriol is at a fever pitch. And I'm thinking, wait a second, what am I coming home to in the most materially prosperous nation on the planet? This abject relational poverty taking hold. So I got myself all stirred up and jotted down some thoughts, a little blog post called It's Time to Listen. And next thing I knew, it was in papers all over the U.S. and it was resonating. Even then, the simple idea of listening first to understand, moving beyond slander, of seeking common ground was hitting a nerve. And that's when Listen First Project was founded.
Wow. Wow. And here we are a bunch of years later, and you're still going. That's exciting.
Job security.
Right. Right. Yeah, this is not the kind of job. I think you and I would be both happy to let this assignment go if this was all fixed.
Work
right?
ourselves right out of a job. That's the goal.
Right. That would be quite all right. And if you listen to the Live First podcast, you know that I lived in Nigeria, so my parents were missionaries, and so I spent my high school years there. And there is something amazing, like you say, about the relationships that are built, and just for all of the material lack, the joy, the relationship, the care for one another, it was amazing. And so even as I look back now and see some of those things, and I recognize it as a high schooler, and I came again from California where we had everything. And I did ask the question, how do you have so much joy when you don't have much stuff? And this is a teenager trying to connect dots, and that just ground my gears. Like, is it possible to be happy without stuff? And then I went there and I'm like, it is quite possible. So, I'd like to start with, and I am kind of by nature a positive person. Instead of the sign that says "stay off the grass," I would prefer a sign that says "stay on the path." That idea, like we can put stuff in the positive or the negative. I choose a positive, but on this one, I think we need to kind of head down though. Where are we really at? Like, how bad is it with polarization? Is it really something, besides you and I wanting job security, but is it really something that is as bad as it's like an ever-present word that we use in any article around politics or other things today?
Yeah. Elliot, I'm a guy that absolutely loves this country, and I'm really concerned by the polarization. I feel blessed to be a part of this place. I think it's exceptional, especially in the sense of the rich variety of backgrounds and beliefs that we have. You often hear America described as a great experiment. Indeed it is, because it's unprecedented. Never in the history of the world has a place with such variety in the folks that are within these lines on a map found a way forward together for centuries on end. And so unsurprisingly, it's never happened before, and it's not easy. I think it's a very serious problem. I think this toxic polarization, this idea of demonizing each other across differences, it's convinced us that our fellow Americans are our enemies. And I think that's a terribly insidious lie that threatens to destroy us as a country. I know a lot of folks watching this want peace in their family. They want calm in their communities, unity in the country, and I don't know, maybe some solutions to problems. So while I think we're in a really rough spot, and if we don't turn the tide, it doesn't lead anywhere good. In fact, it can lead to destruction of society and country and opportunity. But my key message is that there is a lot of hope and a lot of opportunity to turn down the heat and find a way forward together. But it's bad, and you'll see a lot of articles. I've seen several in just the last couple of weeks saying it's not that bad. It's not that bad. I would submit, we're often talking about two different things, because indeed, if you look at the research on where our ideologies are, where our issue positions are, we are so embarrassingly wrong about what those people think and what they think of us. Here's your $10 word, meta misperceptions. But we're even wrong about the thinking of how other people think about us. But it's the affective polarization. Affect meaning emotions. How do I feel? That's off the charts. It's never been higher. When you've got a third of the country who have severed relationships with friends and family, when you've got Thanksgiving dinners literally 24 minutes shorter, in an election year, it's really bad. But it is not because we're actually that far apart. It's because we are perceiving that you're my enemy, that you're a threat, that you're out to get me and my values. And when we get into that kind of misperception, it can become a really dangerous, self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hadn't heard the one, 24 minutes less of Thanksgiving dinner. Is that what we're doing in election years?
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'll put the clock on this year. See
That's
what we get
that's
this
what
year.
the researchers did, and they found, sure enough, and there's classic stats. We can go all day long about stats, but they're classic stats about, would you be okay with your son or daughter marrying a Republican or a Democrat, depending on what you are? And that has grown precipitously. It used to be, only 20% would even imagine an objection, and now it's well over half are saying, nah, I don't want that. Like, that's a divide that we can't cross. There's no tolerance across those differences. We're not seeing dignity across these divides.
Yeah. Wow. And the stat in that blew my mind, because I grew up again in a Christian home where it was normal, like you would expect, like mom and dad told you, you need to marry a Christian, right? And the desire to marry somebody the same political party is greater than marrying somebody from the same religious background.
Yes.
And that just blows my mind. Yep. Like, and I know the world's different than it was when I was growing up, so I'm okay with it. But like, it's still kind of funny to me that has become the thing. That has become the litmus test of a person's character, of who they are, of what they stand for, based upon literally one word: Republican or Democrat, red or blue.
So many dimensions of our identity have been collapsed into this one tribal, binary.
Yeah. Do you have any stats on how, like, the average Republican or the average Democrat, do they really care and identify with that moniker to that great a degree? Because I have a party, but I've never considered it to define me. I mean, that's never been one of the definitions of Elliot, is like, oh, hey, that's me. Am I unusual in that, or is that something where people really like, no, this is what I am, and don't mess with my identity as a?
Yeah, I think it's easier for those of us who are doing this work to over interpret and assume that everybody is walking around, kind of in this fight all the time. And we do see through what you were talking about in our sense of who our children should marry, or how long we're willing to spend time with family members, and the relationships being severed. It has absolutely gone across the board at this point to what our friends at More in Common call that exhausted majority. But I think most of the time, most days of the week, normal people, unlike us perhaps, are concerned about their families. They're doing their job. They're putting food on the table. They've got a lot more to worry about. But we see even then that 77% of Biden and Trump voters believe that Americans who strongly support the other side are, quote, a clear and present danger to America. So even if folks aren't identifying that, waking up in the morning saying, I'm for the R team, I'm for the D team, we're still seeing, especially in an election year, that another one, 80% of partisans see the other party posing a threat that, if not stopped, will destroy America as we know it. And more than half think that those on the other side, our fellow Americans, are the greatest threat to the country. So we can exaggerate the degree of vitriol and certainly the degree of difference on positions, because those loudest voices tend to be the most strident, right? The ones who are on Twitter, X, the ones who are on cable news certainly are not the best representatives of any side and are exaggerating those polls. But all the research I've seen does suggest that, sadly, at this point, it's really hitting close to home. It is impacting our places of worship, our workplaces, our family vacations are falling apart in the middle of the summer, I keep hearing from people. So it has suffused, the deepest, dearest relationships, and what used to just not even be in the same ballpark. Now we're looking at each other with that suspicion and with that distrust, because it has, for far too many of us, become our defining characteristic and the thing that we are most interested in, to put it politely, about the people around us.
Interesting. Switch gears a little bit. Still going to stay on this. Let's try to figure out what's going on here. But it's kind of fun to play the blame game. I mean, I'm not sure it really does any good, but it's at least, great to know that we can at least say, well, that's the problem. So I'm going to go through a few different groups that we talk about regularly, and just tell me, like, is this like high low on the scale of, yeah, that's causing some troubles for us, or man, that's just not where it's at. So I'm going to start with the media. They're
Okay.
always a fun one to pick on. We
Sure.
love claiming that it's Fox News or it's MSNBC or whatever
Right.
it is. But there's always been political satire, right? There's always been political cartoons. I mean, look at what they did with George W. Bush. You go back to President Lincoln, like all of those things. It's always
Right.
been there. So what's different now? Is it their fault? Are they just partially to blame? Like, how does the media play into all this stuff?
Yeah. I mean, I really like to start by looking in the mirror. And I would encourage the same of everybody watching us, because certainly media and social media have fomented some of our worst base instincts. But look, they're responding to incentives. I'm sure we'll get to politicians. Same thing there. They're responding to the incentives that we're giving them as the consumers. What are we clicking on? What are we dialing into? Some of this, in fairness, not to be too hard on ourselves, is hardwired in us. These threat responses and this fear of harm, that is where we are hardwired to focus. But until we demand something differently, and from a consumer sense, like demand, actually click different things, actually consume and become attached to different kinds of content, we can only point our finger but so much at the media leaders who are responding to the marketplace that we are giving them. But certainly it's not doing us any favors that what we hear are the most strident voices, that what the algorithms perpetuate are the most strident voices. But again, they're responding to us. And until enough of us give them different incentives, it's not going to change.
Yeah. That's good. I've always said we have the remote control.
Yes. Yes.
You don't like it? You can change the channel.
That's right.
You're a big boy. You're a big girl. Just change the channel. And it is painful going through my news feed sometimes where I'm like, I really want to read that article.
I know.
But I know if I click on it, what they're going to do. I'm going to get another one of those. So I'm just going to have to can I turn off the internet and click on it and read it? Like, how can it? And so
I always remember Elliot, Chris Steyerwald, who's the political director at Fox News for a long time, saw him speak. He's got a book about cable news and the media, and similar to what you were just saying, those notifications on our phone, it's like an illicit drug. It's like, oh, just a bump. Let me just click this one. Let me just click this one thing. And just then I'll put it away. Then I'll put it away. I mean, that is what it's done to our minds.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely it. And you are right. I am going to talk about politicians. Now, they've always been opposed, right? Like you see it, you go back. Our country is, we're coming up on 250 years here in a few years old. And so before we were founded, while we've been founded, we're a two-party system. So they've been against each other. Is it their fault? Like, are they the ones kind of like, what are they contributing to this whole thing right now?
Yeah. At the risk of, letting too many people off the hook, again, I think in large part, they're responding to incentives. Amanda Ripley, who wrote an incredible book, High Conflict, coined this term conflict entrepreneurs. And we're talking about media or influencers or talking heads. It might be for profit. For politicians, it might be for votes or for dollars. And of course, there are structural problems as well in the primary system and the way in which the most extreme, narrow sliver of us are choosing the candidate that's going to go through, and the degree to which our districts are gerrymandered. So there are a lot of problems there. I think when I look at it, and having worked in DC, with all the incentives stacked against what we know is good for America, stacked against coming together across divides, stacked against working with those people on the other side of the aisle to solve problems, it takes a degree of courage among our political leaders to buck those trends. And the stronger the incentives are from us as voters, from media, from the system structurally, the stronger those incentives are, the greater courage it takes. And by definition, the fewer and fewer politicians will have that courage to really make a stand. So I think politicians are in a tough spot. But that said, I think we are all, including politicians, responsible for what comes out of our mouth, responsible for our rhetoric. And I think there are, some politicians out there, if you look at our friends at Common Ground Committee and their Common Ground scorecard, there are some politicians out there like Congressman Mike Lawler, Don Davis, Don Bacon, Susie Lee, Senator Maggie Hassan. These are perfect scorers on the Common Ground scorecard, and they're doing it right. There are other politicians who are fomenting my worst instincts, who are fomenting my worst inclinations to see those people as a threat, to see my fellow Americans as an enemy. And that is destructive to the country.
Yeah. Okay. So we haven't let anybody off the hook just yet. And I want to switch over to social media because it's actually been around for a couple decades. I mean, I looked it up yesterday. Twitter 2006, Facebook 2004, Instagram 2010. Can't forget my fine old MySpace 2003, and LinkedIn was 2003 as well. Now I know things have changed a lot as it's matured over the last 20 plus years. But how does social media play into this polarization in our society right now?
I think social media and its algorithms that are wired for engagement are playing on and amplifying our worst human instincts. I can't help it. I just keep looking in the mirror and saying, I just, like you mentioned, Elliot, really positive person, glass half full. I have a hard time believing there are all that many nefarious actors out there. I think people are responding to incentives before them and maybe lacking some courage to do better for ourselves and those around us. But it is taking, what I might spew from the relative anonymity of behind a screen, not having to see, the flesh of the person that I'm coming after. And it is charging us up. And then we're virtue signaling because we are so lonely and we are lacking belonging. So I could go in so many different directions on this, but with how lonely we are, with how unfulfilled we are in life, less association, whether it's in a church community or any other civic community, we are finding our identity, our belonging, our bonds in these tribes that too often are defined by who they are against. And we've seen it again and again and again on both sides of the aisle. One day I might be talking about my, strong, sincerely held policy convictions. But if my team goes a different direction the next day, forget that position. I'm not going to ostracize myself from this community. Right. I'm going to say whatever I need to say to feel like I am part of something and that I am accepted. And when all of that loneliness and all of the mental health challenges that we have get stirred up into this toxic polarization vortex, then we're in a place where new technologies like social media just turbocharge it, just show the worst of humanity and bring out the worst of humanity in a way that just takes us further and further down the doom loop.
Yeah. 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 And it's tough too, because you kind of can't avoid it. And again, I know the algorithm is serving us stuff, but it seems like this time of year, whether it's on your social media feeds, whether it's on your news feeds, like that is what's being given to us. I love the fact that you keep bringing up community and our loneliness, and that seems to be one of the core challenges as a nation, but it's manifesting itself in so many different ways. And it's interesting because I think what I'm hearing you saying is, in my loneliness, I finally found my tribe. And then this particular time, this tribe is my political affiliation, my political party. And the thought of not having any tribe because I don't sign up for one of the planks on the platform, like I can't afford to lose, even though they're disembodied, but we still have this idea of, well, I know there's some of me out there somewhere and I'm running into them on the street, even if I don't know it, that even the idea of losing one more affiliation is just emotionally tragic for us.
It's terrifying. There's an existential dread, and we're wired that way. I'm reading an awesome book right now to endorse it, a manuscript of Outraged by Professor Kurt Gray at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. It's going to come out in January, and he's walking through our development as a human species and our morality and our harm focused brains. And that idea of not having the protection that we've long found in being a part of community, talk about being left out in the cold. I mean, it's terrifying. It's an existential threat that our primal brains just can't handle. So there's little that we wouldn't do to maintain that sense of belonging. And unfortunately, again, when we're finding it in places that are defined in opposition to our fellow Americans, to our fellow human beings, that's when it gets really dangerous. But listen, I've been, guilty myself of thinking, gosh, I kind of feel alone in this space of bridging divides. And I feel like parts of my identity are being persecuted and judged by one side or another. And so much of my instinct wants to say, you know what, maybe I'd come out of the cold and join the battle, because at least there's more camaraderie there. Yeah. It's a dangerous instinct. And thankfully, as things have continued to get worse, there are more and more people, millions of Americans, who are finding their identity in opposition to this problem, in opposition not to fellow Americans, but to toxic polarization, and are finding each other in the hundreds of organizations across the Listen First Coalition doing the work of seeing dignity across differences, of bringing Americans together across divides to build trust and understanding and respect and relationships and solutions.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, you just that perfect segue. Tell us about the Listen First project. I can get it out. Tell us about that. You founded it in 2013. What is it? What do you guys do? I think we know what you're about, but tell us how that all works out.
Yeah, absolutely. So Listen First Project serves today as what we think of as the backbone organization for the Bridging Divides movement. This is the movement of hundreds of organizations who, as I said, are bringing folks together across divides, who are working day in and day out to turn down the heat and find a way forward together. As you said, with that bus ride in 2013, I jotted down some thoughts and then founded Listen First Project. But 4 years later, it was still the Pierce in His Pajamas project. It was a side gig. But then as we saw things get worse, as we saw marches escalate to murder in Charlottesville and violence taking hold, it was another time that God kind of kicked me in the pants, pushed me out of the boat and said, you got to make this your full-time mission. I felt compelled to jump all in. And since that time, I've realized, starting in 2017, that I wasn't alone, that there were other folks out there who were doing this work of bringing folks together across divides. And something about me thought, well, gee, if there's other groups out there, by the way, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I wonder if we could have a greater impact together. And they very graciously were like, sure, Pierce, we'll join your Listen First Coalition. 4 organizations in 2017 and now over 500. And in their own way, they are doing that work of helping us see dignity across differences, engage in enriching and fun conversations and experiences. On CBS Evening News just this week was one I was able to be a part of here in North Carolina, Raft for America, where we're getting together with folks across divides, red, blue, faith, whatever, and literally rafting down a river in the middle of God's creation. And there's something really special about letting our hair down in a way in that kind of environment, in nature, with recreation, having fun, and just recognizing that shared humanity. So, Raft for America. And meanwhile, you've got groups like Urban Rural Action that is working in communities all over the country to bring folks together across political, racial, generational differences, to build relationships, to dialogue, and to take concrete action, making their communities safer. 92NY's Share Our America is helping people build the foundation for change in their communities by forging unlikely relationships. And then we talk about the election coming up. My partners at Common Ground USA are going to be hosting these Love Anyway feasts the week after the election to remind us of the power of community and offer an alternative to that us versus them politics. So in so many different ways, so many different flavors, we're welcoming those like us who are part of this exhausted majority, had enough, looking for some peace, some calm, some unity, some solutions, and are willing to be part of a more hopeful path for the future of the country.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And it is exciting that there are so many organizations that are trying to work on this, that are working on this, right? That, you know, life can just seem like a bunch of divides between neighbors, divides within our own communities, divides along ethnic lines. And obviously we're talking about politics today, so that's a big one, but there's so many out there. And in my life experience, when I start talking to somebody, the divides start just melting away so quickly.
Yes.
Like I can see somebody and I have instant judgments about them, who they are, what they think, where they're going, like just instant. And I haven't talked to them.
Totally.
I've just seen them.
We're all making this snap
right. And I get that. That's part of our, our caveman brain.
That's
where
right.
we have to make quick judgment. That's how we stay alive. But that's not helping us right now. That's not helping us right now when it comes to bridging divides, because I've had conversations with unlikely people that you're like, man, I really enjoyed that. And we actually have way more in common than I ever thought we would have, until we enjoyed a meal together, until we went rafting together, until we served on a community project together, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And I think the brilliance of all of those that you've said there is that it takes the focus off the dividing things and puts it on something else. And when I'm shoulder to shoulder with somebody, focused down the road, focused on whatever, all of a sudden, whatever might have divided us is much less. It just kind of melts away. And so, and I'm going to push us back towards the loneliness thing, but that's part of it too, where there are people who are just absolutely afraid, like literal fear of leaving their homes, of interacting with other people. And we've lost that ability, the drive, or there's a fear piece that just overwhelms us. Like, I don't want it. They might be weird. I live in a big city. Right. And so even just having somebody look you in the eye when you're walking down the sidewalk, like it's weird. So I walk my dog on the regular basis around our neighborhood. I work from home most days.
Yeah.
My dog starts bugging me somewhere between 10:30 and 11. She's like, it's walking time. Let's go.
I don't know what you're doing, but it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It melt away.
Go now.
This is the focus.
And people, mostly it's just, just passing without any, attention to anybody. I walked with my wife last Friday. Man, people were so friendly. And I'm like, what's going on right now? I mean, yes, you are, I'm sure, way more friendly than I am, but this is crazy. How come everybody is talking to you right now, or at least acknowledging you? And when I come out every other day, they're like, just, I don't know, scary white guy. We got to keep on moving. So anyway, but we have to get out of that fear place. And I love that about the projects. We'll circle this back around. These projects where we're bringing people together and like they're breaking down those divides. And some of those are just fearful. We're just fearful to engage.
Right.
Because we don't know what it is. We've been hurt in the past. We saw the TV show that says this is going to happen. Yep. And often, most of the time, that's not the way it lives out. So
that's right.
What are some practical tips you have for people? I mean, let's just kind of get basic here. We're talking, and I'm going to give you some scenarios in a minute, but before we get there, like, just what are some basic practical tips for people to navigate some of these divides?
Yeah, across the Listen First Coalition and all these heroes who have shown up and are dedicating themselves to saving our country from tearing apart and making America stronger by defeating toxic polarization, you can find a whole lot of tips and a whole lot of great insight. But as the backbone guy, and we've had national events and campaigns, I've wanted to boil it down to 3. And my favorite 3 are to listen with curiosity, to speak from your own experience, and to connect with respect. And I feel like those capture it. There's so much more. I like to talk, especially from a faith perspective. I think about what I learned growing up in church about suspending judgment and extending grace. So there are a lot of other ones that I might add on as well, but those 3 will get us a long way. If we're listening with curiosity, if we are genuinely interested in, as you said, that person that we're with, if we're interested in hearing their story, if we are interested in sharing from our own story, maybe not facts, turns out that doesn't work anyway, but sharing from our own story, not what we heard from the talking head, but our own story, that allows us to connect with respect. And it allows that magic that you're describing, Elliot, because I see it too. It's really hard to hate up close, as is often said. I mean, I just think the way God has made us, this wiring just takes hold when we calm down, slow down, chill out long enough to just engage with somebody and have that conversation. And I think those three tips are what I would point to most practically in our daily lives with whoever we're with. Yeah. Listen with curiosity, speak from our own experience, and connect with respect.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And we're using similar terms at LRK. It's the ones that I'm going with is you come in open-hearted. Excuse me. You come in open-handed. We don't have judgment, right? We're just going to say, hey, I have these beliefs, but I'm going to hold them loosely. I may not change my mind today, but I'm just going to present these here. And then I go into being open-minded, which just means, just like you're saying, let's be a listener, ask good questions to gain understanding, and don't be a teacher. When we get into teacher mode, it's like our brains switch to something else. Teachers teach. And that's because you're
ignorant. So convinced that if we just teach enough, those unenlightened folks we're speaking with will come around and see our way.
That's exactly it. And then open your heart to find connection, right? And if we're doing those three things, which I think is exactly what you're saying, it's amazing. And even if you're talking about difficult subjects, that should be true of just normal conversation. Totally. But even when you're talking about difficult subjects, if you use that kind of framework, it just lowers the emotional level. It puts us in a place where they become human. And I think that's where we miss it on social media. That's where we miss it with the talking heads. It's that these other people aren't. It's just we kind of take the humanity out of this. So
precisely. I mean, that is step one for any sort of productive disagreement or engagement across differences, is at least seeing that person as human. And the dehumanization is where we put ourselves on an extremely dangerous path.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely it. Okay. How does this work itself out in the workplace? I want to give you a couple of different places where we are challenged. I got to work with this person. They think some stuff that just I can't stand. How does this work itself out in the workplace? Do you have any advice for everybody out there working today who has that 1 or 5 people who they just I cannot stand what they're saying?
Yeah. I think we want to start by thinking about what we want out of a given interaction. And it's okay. I'm not here saying that everybody needs to just kind of run to the fire and have that conversation. If it's with someone that because of your own temperament or their temperament, you don't think it's going to go well, fine. Stay away, from it. Stay in conversational spaces and topics that are not going to devolve into conflict. But, with a sufficient amount of thinking ahead about what do I want to get out of this conversation? Am I going to keep my own cool and be able to just be curious and listen with curiosity? Then what a fascinating opportunity to at least tickle some of your own, curiosities. It may be indignation, but then can perhaps become curiosity with where this person is coming from, and understand that it is coming from their story, from their values. What Kurt Gray has written in this new book, Outrage, to be out in January, is that our moral judgments are based on our senses of harm and vulnerability. So we can find some common ground in the sense that we all want to avoid harm for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our communities, but perhaps just have some different assumptions of vulnerability across different groups in society. And if we can lean into that, to stories of suffering in my life, in your life, and in being curious about what that sense of harm and who is being harmed that may lead somebody to a very different positional and ideological position than I'm in, then we can learn an awful lot from somebody and connect with them as that human being, much more so than we'll ever do on social media or cable news. So think about, wanting to get underneath those positions and learn a little something along the way.
Yeah. No, that's so good. Because again, that's entering with curiosity and trying to ask good questions. Right. And we don't want to enter with contempt, because we can enter with, how can you think that? Versus, tell me how you came to that conclusion, or like, tell me the background, right? There's a curious voice, and then there's a contempt voice. So put the curious voice on before you get in there. And I think everybody has a tragedy, a challenge, a difficulty in their past that you don't see. And it could be a present thing. It could be something that they are dealing with right now. And, how I can't tell you how many stories of, how you doing? And it starts going a little bit. And then you find out my mother is sick, my father's sick, my kid's doing this, there's some tragedies going on that you just don't know about.
Right.
And all of a sudden you're like, my level of empathy for this person just changed, because I just found out about a tragedy that happened when they were a child, or something that's happening right now. And does it even matter that they think that now? Or I know why you think that, because this happened to you. Well, that makes sense. Yep. Okay, good. Yep. And rather than coming in with a judgment, we're coming in kind of with that curious.
This dynamic that we're all too susceptible to, called moral typecasting, where somebody is either a villain or a victim. And it is never that simple. And it's when, just as you said, Elliot, we unlock those stories of suffering, of real life, of harm, that I can recognize that humanity and that vulnerability, and I can have that empathy, because that I can relate to. Avoiding harm, I can relate to. Suffering harm, I can relate to. And that, I think, is a real master key for how we can unlock humanity in our conversations and find a way forward together.
Yeah, that's good. All right, now I'm going to take it into the I'm going to call it the nuclear family: mom, dad, and a couple of kids, or whatever, a parent, a couple of kids, whatever the makeup of that is, step kids, whatever, blended families. Probably more parents will be listening to this than kids, but what does it look like when your high school student, your college student comes home and how did you get this political ideology? Like, really, where did this happen? And so you're sitting around the family, the dinner table. What does that look like just in kind of that small group when my child is going off the rails with what they're thinking right now?
I think you actually answered it in your question, Elliot. I think it is in that question. Tell me about, the experience, the conversations, the observations that have shaped you in these views. What are the things that you've experienced or that you've learned that have led you to this conclusion? So honestly, it's a little bit like Sunday school, where Jesus is the answer. You could almost say curiosity is always the answer here. But we found across so many programs that my partners do that idea of asking folks, tell me about your experience. Now, if you're in that nuclear family, an awful lot of the answer to this question for the folks around the table. But even still, what has shaped you? What has led you to feel this way, to hold this value, to have this conviction? Then you're going to learn a lot. I mean, we're just not going to get anywhere saying, I think black and you think white. Okay, let's fight about it. That's just, we'll get absolutely nowhere and just destroy the relationship. So I think, if that's the conversation that's to be had, which it should be had, then wondering and literally asking, what's leading you to this? Tell me about some of these experiences. What have you seen that I haven't seen? And then maybe, we have that reciprocal nature, I think, when we get a good thing going between us humans. And so that curiosity can be returned as well.
Yeah, that's good. That's good, because somehow we think our children should think exactly like us. That's not what I taught you. I'm not sure why. How, what did that? And I have friends who like to blame it on their college professors. Oh, they go to those liberal state schools and they're just in that college professor. And man, I see some steam coming out of the head of some of my friends as their kids come home for, spring break or Christmas break. But I love that too. And again, that we're beating a dead horse here, folks, but just, because this works, that's why we keep bringing it up. That idea of curiosity. Curiosity is not. It's not. It's not. It's not going to create conflict.
Right.
It's not confrontational. It is just, and it doesn't hurt to ask a question and
Right.
not respond with what you think as well. And I think that's one of the hardest things. I'm a person who I'm pretty sure I can fix everybody's problems. I know what the problems are and I have the answers, and that's just how I'm built. And so, keeping quiet and just saying, well, wow, that's really interesting. Tell me more.
That's right.
That takes a special mindset for me to do it. And
Yes.
I assume I'm not alone.
You're sure not alone. There are at least two of us here that are implicated. But those three words, tell me more, are magic. Just tell me more.
Yeah.
And again, be genuinely curious, because any of us who, feel that somebody wants to hear our story, we just have such a positive, warm, affective response, because when you want to hear my story, Elliot, I realize you care. I realize you at least see me as a person with enough dignity to be interested in. Yeah. And my defenses are going to come down. I'm going to chill out a little bit. I'm going to soften my spirit and share with you. And it's going to be kind of impossible for any decent person in that situation not to say, hey, thanks for letting me share. I'm curious. Tell me more about yourself as well. Yeah. Now you're getting to know each other. Now you're understanding values. You're outside of talking points, and you're having a conversation that can strengthen a relationship, undoubtedly. May teach you some things along the way and broaden your perspectives on a given issue. But you will be demonstrating that kind of love and that kind of care and concern for our fellow man, never mind our family, that we're called to.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. I think one of the things for me too is that humility, to think that I don't have all the answers. Yeah. Clearly I think about things, I read about things, I learn about things, but I talk to people who are way more well-read than I am. See, I can't even speak good English today. Well-read, well thought through, doing different things than me that just have a different nuance to the same, conversation we're having. And for me, that's always the best. When I listen to somebody, I'm like, I'd never thought about it that way. Like, that's a great way to think about it. I'm not sure I agree with you 100%, but that is a great perspective. And you know what? It also helps me get better with my own thinking. Whether or not I agree with them, my own thinking is challenged, and it's either broken down or it's built up or it stays the same. But that idea that I don't know everything, I don't have everything figured out, like how we can just humbly approach conversations too.
Yes.
Anyway,
it's an opportunity to learn and to explore. And I think, going back to your question about the workplace, I think just checking our motives is so important, because if we're going in to debate and to convince somebody and to battle with facts, again, there's great research. It's called the boomerang effect. Like, it will have the opposite. So good luck with that. Like, do that with your dog. It'll be more effective than doing it with a human being. But if we are going in and really interested in learning and exploring, thinking of it as kind of an adventure and a journey to better understand something, to get smarter and to learn more, then that's going to be a really productive, enriching, and enjoyable conversation.
Yeah. I've had this thought recently that we approach these conversations sometimes like it's debate club, where the teacher, they're like, okay, this is your side. This is your side. Here's my opening arguments. Here's my 3 points and my closing. And if I say it just right, I will win. And for most of these things, there's nothing. Victory is not what we're aiming for. Like, that's not. I mean, competition is great. I love competition, but like most of the time, it's not debate club, bro. Like, that was high school, maybe college, but you need to just set that part of your life aside and let's just have, and again, we keep saying this, but let's just have good conversation. So,
And even if we do want it to get to a place where we are sharing facts and insights and perspectives that might shape our views, that is only going to happen on the foundation of some trust that is built by an initial interaction that is not that.
Yes.
So it's often, the end point, and that's good enough, but it at least has to be the starting point, this curiosity and this scene of dignity across differences. Only then will you have earned the kind of trust to go to a deeper level about any issues that you may want to discuss.
Yeah, that's so good. For people considering or already have broken relationship, what would you say to folks? We know the stats out there around the 2016 election. You threw out about a third of the nation's broken some relationships, and we have a vote coming up very soon, which could do this again before Thanksgiving. What's your advice to somebody who's either broken relationship or like, dude, I think I'm just out. Like I heard that I've heard too much. I'm out now. So what's your response to that?
I think we've got to take a step back and think about what matters most in our lives and who matters most in our life. And within those priorities, who do we want to be? It is so easy for us to get wrapped up in the pitched battle of the moment where there's one side and there's another side. There's good and there's evil. We can play that game. It'll destroy our relationships. It'll damage our lives. It could destroy our country. Or we could rise above it. We can take, and it really does take kind of taking a minute, take a deep breath when you're coming into that meal, when you're coming into that meeting with someone, a family member or otherwise, to say, what matters here? Mm-hmm. Is it talking about the vote that was cast? Or is it wanting to know who this person is and what's going on in their life and what they care about today? Is it being there for them? Is it loving them? Is it the health and the sustainability of my relationship with this person? Or is it me being right and me judging and me trying to fix? Just what is it? What's the goal? And I think often when we take a minute to say, what really matters beyond this election cycle, between this political moment, what matters?
Yeah.
And often, if we give ourselves that moment to reflect, the answer is easy. It's our relationships. It's the people that are nearest and dearest to us. And what a tragedy to allow politics and media and this toxic polarization and all of its insidious force to destroy what matters most. Just say no. I'm not getting sucked into that because I've got a higher calling and things matter more.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. I absolutely love that. All right, this is my final question for you. I'm just going to leave that statement. Everybody just record that and live that. Let's just do that. Like relationship over being right. Let's just go with that one, guys. What's exciting you right now? What's one thing in your life? Doesn't have to be related to this at all. What's one thing in your life that makes you smile? It could be something in your family. It could be something, something that's happening around you that this is exciting me right now.
Yeah, that's an easy one, Elliot. Got married 3 months ago, and Lauren and I finally had a chance this past weekend. We're not very good at slowing down, but to actually look through all the pictures and pick our favorites and relive that. So, being surrounded over in Bermuda, an absolutely beautiful slice of creation by 30 folks who are nearest and dearest to our hearts, and being just overwhelmed by that love that we felt is sticking with me, and starting a new chapter and living it in the way that I think God has called me to live my life, which doesn't tend to be the achievement, accomplishment driven nature that I've had over time, but really practicing what I preach and actually putting those relationships that are nearest to me first, over politics, over work, but really trying to slow down to make my measures of success love, joy, and peace. That is a journey that I'm on right now, and it's been transformative. So I'm excited about this new marriage. I'm excited about slowing down enough to keep those first things first, and to do in my own life what I'm encouraging others to do.
I love that. I love that. If people want to get involved in this, in bridging, can you just tell them where people to go to hear more about Listen First Project?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll give a couple tips in addition to what we talked about of just in everyday life, listening with curiosity, speaking from your own experience, connecting with respect. We talked a lot about social media. If you want to see some great stuff on social media, follow Starts With Us. That's our partner that's putting stellar content and inspiration out across all the platforms. You might watch the film Dialogue America from Idios Institute. Tanya Israel has a fantastic new book out called Facing the Fracture, a really cool tool that my friends at Weave have put out. You can find at trustmap.org. You see how your neighborhood stacks up on trust and how it can be built. And then if you're only going to do one thing to get looped into the movement, just go to our listenfirstproject.org website and sign the Listen First pledge. It's our Listen First to Understand. That'll put you in the loop on our email list, and you'll learn about all these programs that are happening across the Bridging Divides movement. So the Listen First pledge at listenfirstproject.org. And if you add a comment there, I'd be happy to reach out to you and help you find the right spot for you. But as we've been saying the whole time, I think we got to each start by looking in the mirror, and we got to ask ourselves a pivotal question. Are we going to fight against our fellow Americans or fight for America? And my hope comes from this, that if enough of us choose to see dignity across differences and seek to find a way forward together, America's future will be bright.
Yeah. I love it. Pierce, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been absolutely an incredible conversation. Congratulations on the new marriage. All the best to you and your bride. And for everybody else out there today, let's go live faith first.